Alright, so today we'll be starting with pharmacology, and our unit which we are taking is CNS pharmacology. So we will be starting with this lecture basically deals with sedatives and hypnotics, the introductory portion of sedatives and hypnotics. Okay, so let me just describe in brief the two types of or two classes of drugs, that is CNS depressants and CNS stimulants. So these two belongs to CNS depressants, and there are actually four classes of drugs, and fifth also we can consider sometime, but basically four classes of drugs which we need to take care about, which we need to study about when we are studying CNS pharmacology, CNS depressants. So these are sedatives, hypnotic, narcotic, and anesthetics, and two of them are written here, sedatives and hypnotics. So let me just clarify the meaning of all these. So sedative means, first basically we need to understand a term that is called sedation if we want to understand the various the CNS depressant drugs. So sedation is the state in which the cerebral perception is low and the animal is calm. Okay, the cerebral perception is low and that particular animal is calm. Okay, so sedation is found in all four categories of CNS depressant, that is sedative, hypnotic, narcotic, and anesthetic. But the degree of sedation varies, and in this order only, that is, this is ascending order: sedation for sedative, then hypnotic, then narcotic, then anesthetic. This is the order of increasing sedation. Okay, so as it has been written here, sedatives makes the animal calm and hypnotics induces sleep. So which kind of sleep does hypnotics induce? That is called normal sleep. Now, if we increase the concentration or administer hypnotic in higher doses to an animal, then this leads to anesthetic effects. Or first, before anesthetic, we can say narcotic effects. Narcotic, that is deep sleep, from which the animal can only be roused or aroused with the help of a very strong stimulus. And if that stimulus is arousing stimulus is removed, then the animal will relapse into its previous sleeping state. Okay. So it leads to anesthetic effects, first narcotic, then anesthetic. And if hypnotics are given in more and greater doses, more higher or greater doses, then it will lead to respiratory depression, which will lead to coma and death. Okay, so this is a basic meaning. So these all will be done by sedatives also. But sedatives, we have to increase the concentration a little bit more as compared to hypnotics. We have already discussed why. Why? Because of the fact that sedatives, then hypnotics, then narcotic, then anesthetic. These are this is the ascending order in which these causes sedation. Sedatives cause the least sedation. Okay. These only make the individual calm, animal calm, and just they can only reduce the cerebral perception. Okay. Okay. So now this basically explains the above what I have explained. So sedative, higher doses leads to hypnotic, hypnotic in lower doses leads to sedation. Act as sedatives. Okay. So that is the basic meaning. Let's move ahead. So this is, I have made a dose response curve, that is DRC, for hypnotic and sedatives. So as we can see, these are the various state of sedation: calm, sleep, anesthesia, respiratory depression, coma or death. And these are the various state, two curves, sorry, hypnotic and sedative. So if we try to understand these curves, so first we should understand this, that hypnotics have a straight or steep DRC, dose response curve, and sedatives have flat DRC, dose response curve. Okay. Okay, and now if we try to understand the reason behind this, the reason is that, basic reason, that this curve explains that hypnotic need a very little dose increment in order to act as an anesthetic. Why is this so? It is because of the fact that the increasing order of the sedation, that is, the order is sedatives and hypnotics and narcotics and anesthetic. So sedative, and if we talk about hypnotic here, then hypnotic is basically ahead of sedative in terms of causing sedation. So it will cause more sedation, it will lead to sleep, it will reduce normal sleep. So that is why hypnotics need a very little dose increment as compared to sedatives for act as an anesthetic. Okay, and when they act as anesthetic and their concentration are more increased, then these lead to respiratory depression, so that leads to coma or death of the animal. Okay, but for sedatives to cause us that, more and more dose of sedatives are required. Why? It is because of the fact that sedatives are at the least point of causing sedation. They will cause the least sedation. Okay, so we have to increase the dose of sedative much larger as compared to hypnotic if we want the same anesthetic or comatose effect to be produced in that particular animal. Alright, okay, so that is why hypnotics have a steep or straight DRC, dose response curve, and sedative have a flat DRC or flat dose response curve. Okay, So now drugs which act as both hypnotics and sedatives. So these are the 6, these are not the drugs, these are the classes of drugs or groups of drugs. So it includes various barbiturates, benzodiazepines, atypical benzodiazepines or Z compounds, melatonin, alcohol, opioids. Okay. Okay. So these are the group of drugs. So barbiturates include various drugs, benzodiazepines include various drugs, Z compound include various drugs, melatonin, alcohol, and opioids contain various drugs. Okay. Okay. So now we will in general study the mode of action of each of these 6 classes of drug, very basic, in very brief manner. And then from further lectures we will check benzodiazepine, atypical benzodiazepine, barbiturates, all of these, especially these two in extreme details. Okay. As much as is required for our BVSC level. So if we talk about the mode of action of these 3 drugs, that is benzodiazepines, atypical benzodiazepines, also called Z compounds, and barbiturates. So we can see that these reach the CNS of an animal. Their mode of action is as follows. They reach the CNS of an animal. Here in CNS we are talking about basically brain, not spinal cord. Okay, we'll talk about spinal cord later, but right now we are talking about brain. Okay, so they reach the CNS of an animal, and now there is a neurotransmitter which is found in the brain of animals naturally, that is called GABA, G-A-B-A, GABA. Just focus on this GABA, that is gamma aminobutyric acid. So this receptor is an inhibitory type of neurotransmitter. Sorry, this neurotransmitter is an inhibitory type of neurotransmitter which is found in the brain of animal. So what will happen? There are some, obviously the neurotransmitter, any compound can act when there are receptors for that compound present on the tissue on which the response is to be produced. Okay. So what will happen? This GABA, what it does is the GABA is naturally secreted in the brain of animal as neurotransmitter. That GABA will bind to GABA A receptor, and GABA A receptor, where particular portion of GABA A receptor, what is the particular point of GABA A receptor? That is chloride ion channels of GABA A receptor. R means receptor. Okay. Okay. So when we give these 3 drugs, then they will lead to the CNS. That is, they will reach to the brain. They will reach the GABA A receptor, and inside the GABA A receptor, these drugs act on the chloride ion channels of GABA A receptor. Okay. And now, when these drugs act on chloride ion channels of GABA A receptor, then this opens the chloride ion channels and makes this receptor work. Okay. So what this basically is trying to explain is, this is trying to explain that these drugs act on the chloride ion channels of GABA A receptor. Okay. And when they will act on the GABA A receptor chloride ion channels, then this will lead to the opening of that channel, and these channels will open. Chloride ion channel will open, and this will lead to an influx of chloride ions, and this will lead to the suppression, inhibition of nerve conduction of neuron within the neuron. Okay, so that is basically physiology, how it works. So now pharmacology is, thus these 3 drugs are called GABA A receptor chloride channel agonist. So there are 2 terms, agonist and antagonist. So there are 2 types of drugs. There are 2 types of drug, agonist and antagonist. So these 2 terms are extremely important, and we need to understand the basics of force. So agonist means that any drug which mimics the function of the natural substance which is being secreted in the body. So what I am trying to explain, let us understand this with the same example. So GABA is a natural substance which is being secreted in the body. Okay. So GABA is the same natural substance secreted naturally in the body, but we are giving any drug, if we are giving any drug, administering any drug to the animal which is performing the same function as that of GABA, then it is called an agonist. Okay, that is an agonist drug. That is a drug which mimics the function of the particular natural substance. That is called agonist. And if we talk about antagonist, that is not given here, but that is not required right now, but that these 2 terms are extremely important, agonist and antagonist. So if we talk about antagonists, and antagonists are basically the drugs which act in the opposite manner to the natural substance present in the body. Okay, so if any drug we are giving and that is inhibiting the GABA chloride ion channels, that is reducing the influx of chloride ions, that is closing the chloride ion channels, not opening it, so that is called the antagonist of GABA A receptor chloride ion channels. Okay, done. Okay. Now, so basically, how does benzodiazepine, atypical benzodiazepine, barbiturates work? They reach the CNS of an animal, they act on GABA A receptor, then inside the GABA A receptor, these drugs act on chloride ion channels of GABA A receptor, and these channels, when these drugs will act on GABA A receptor chloride ion channel, this will lead to opening of GABA A receptor, and there will be influx of chloride ion channels into the neuron. According to physiology, this will lead to the inhibition or hyperpolarization, basically hyperpolarization, inhibition of the nerve conduction, impulse conduction along the nerve. Okay. Okay, if you talk about melatonin, so there are some receptor in the brain, 2 receptor in the brain, that is melatonin 1, MT1, MT2. So on, not melatonin 1, melatonin 2, sorry, MT1 and MT2, on which this melatonin acts. Okay. Now opioids, so this point is important. So opioids act on 3 receptors, that is mu, kappa or delta. And these three receptors collectively called opioid receptors. So this is important. This can be asked, like for example, anything can be asked, but I'm giving an example that this can be asked, what are the three names of opioid receptors? Mu, kappa, delta. All right. Okay. So that is one thing. Now alcohol does not act on any specific receptor. Alcohol does not have any specific receptor. It can act on any receptor, n number of receptor. For example, GABA chloride channel, opioid receptor, mu, kappa, lambda, glutamate receptor, all of these. Okay. Okay. Now, if we talk about few important points, then these three group of drugs, that is benzodiazepine, atypical benzodiazepine or Z compound, and barbiturates, these are highly addictive, okay, and show tolerance, except melatonin. And there is one more point written here, that alcohol shows cross tolerance with barbiturates, benzodiazepine, opioids. So before we try to understand these points, you should know the meaning of two terms, tolerance and cross tolerance. Okay. Okay. So tolerance basically means that, suppose we will take an example first, that someone is continuously taking the drugs for headache in order to reduce that pain, but what will happen after some time, that same dose of drug will not lead to the reduction of headache or any kind of pain, analgesic which that person or animal is being administered. So why is this so? It is because of the fact that the property of tolerance of drugs. So tolerance of body part. So reduced response to a drug after repeated administration of the same dose, and thus it requires higher doses to produce the same pharmacological effect. It basically means that if we are giving a drug of the same dose continuously, then what will happen? This will reduce the response to offer to okay. So this will lead to the reduced response of a drug after administration of the same dose of drug, and thus we will require higher dose of that drug to produce the same pharmacological effect. Okay? And cross tolerance basically means that if we are giving one drug and then we are giving second drug, so this second drug will lead to the less absorption or less second drug will not lead the first drug, let the first drug to show its pharmacological effect, or vice versa can also take place. Okay, so why? Because there are two reasons: either both drugs act on same receptor by the same mechanism basically. Okay. So now we move on to these 2 points. Then these three groups of drugs like benzodiazepine, atypical benzodiazepine, barbiturates are highly addictive and show tolerance except melatonin. Okay, these show tolerance except melatonin. That is, they will require continuous. If they are being administered continuously to an animal, then these will require higher and higher doses. Continuously, if they are being continuously administered, then they will require higher and higher doses in order to show their pharmacological effect. And alcohol shows cross tolerance with barbiturates, benzodiazepine, opioids. So basically it means that if you will give alcohol in these three drugs, then either of one of them will act, other will not act because of cross tolerance. Okay. So last point for today's lecture is that death due to benzodiazepine and barbiturate poisoning always due to respiratory depression or respiratory death. Okay. Thank you.